A white-haired judge bursts into laughter when he sees a young black woman in a courtroom suit. He thinks she's just someone's daughter tagging along. But the laughter dies the second she steps forward, her voice calm and composed. She's the defense attorney, and one of the most brilliant legal minds in the country. She finished law school at 15. She's crushed high-profile trials across the state. And now she's here, in his courtroom. The whole gallery goes silent. And the judge? He realizes too late he just humiliated a national prodigy, in front of everyone. What happens next isn't just a trial. It's a quiet war of truth versus power, dignity versus legacy. And when the pressure builds, the judge has to choose between protecting his reputation or doing the one thing he's never done in his life, admit he was wrong. The morning sun painted long shadows across the courthouse steps. As Judge Clayton Hargrove pulled into his reserved parking space, he adjusted his rear-view mirror, catching a glimpse of his silver hair and stern expression. Perfect, as always. 42 years on the bench had taught him what justice looked like. It looked like order, like respect, like things staying exactly where they belonged. He grabbed his worn leather briefcase, the same one he'd carried since law school, and made his way up the granite steps. The courthouse stood like a temple of marble and oak, its columns reaching toward the cloudless sky. Every morning, these steps reminded him of his place in the world. This was his domain. "Morning, Your Honor." The security guard tipped his head respectfully as Hargrove passed through the metal detector without pause, a courtesy earned through decades of service. In the hallway, courthouse staff parted like a stream around a boulder. Court Clerk Evelyn Price approached with his morning docket. "Good morning, Judge. Full gallery today for the Bell case." "Ah, yes, the pharmacy incident." He took the file, scanning it briefly. "Time to remind folks about law and order in this town." The morning light streamed through the tall courthouse windows, casting warm rectangles across the polished floor. Hargrove could hear the murmur of voices from his courtroom. A full house always made him stand a little straighter. Inside, the gallery buzzed with whispered conversations. He recognized the regulars, the church ladies who treated court like morning service, a couple of retired deputies who came for the entertainment, and Tommy Walsh from the local paper, pen already poised over his notepad. The defendants section held a different crowd today. Several older men in veteran caps, their backs military straight despite their years. In the center sat Luther Bell, a lean man in his 70s wearing a carefully pressed suit that had seen better days. His weathered hands were folded in his lap, head bowed slightly. "All rise." The bailiff's voice brought the room to order. Hargrove took his seat, adjusting his robe with practiced dignity. "Be seated." The familiar routine settled over him like armor. First case, State versus Luther Bell. Charges of felony, assault. The prosecution table rose first. Assistant DA Brent Kincaid, predictably immaculate in his Brooks Brothers suit. But when the defense table stood, Hargrove had to pause. A young black woman in a precisely tailored navy suit rose beside the defendant. Her hair was styled in neat twists, her posture perfectly professional. She couldn't have been more than 20. The laugh burst from him before he could stop it. Not a polite chuckle, but a genuine bark of amusement that echoed off the courtroom walls. The sound hung in the air like smoke. "Well now," he drawled, letting his amusement show. "Isn't this precious? Sweetheart, the defendant's family sits in the gallery. This isn't bring your daughter to court day." The silence that followed was absolute. Luther Bell's shoulders curved inward, his chin dropping further toward his chest. In the gallery, someone gasped softly. The young woman didn't move, didn't flinch. Her expression remained perfectly composed, her dark eyes steady as they met his. The only sign of reaction was a slight straightening of her spine, as if his words had made her taller instead of smaller. Tommy Walsh's pen scratched loudly against paper in the sudden quiet. One of the veteran's caps hit the floor with a soft thump, dropped from suddenly nerveless fingers. Evelyn Price stood frozen beside, her desk, a look of horror dawning on her face. Even Assistant DA Kincaid shifted uncomfortably, his polished smile slipping. But it was the church ladies' faces that finally penetrated Hargrove's consciousness, their wide eyes and covered mouths, heads shaking in disbelief. He'd lost them. In 42 years, he'd never lost the church ladies. The young woman remained standing, hands relaxed at her sides, waiting with the patience of someone who had weathered storms before. The morning sun caught her face, highlighting cheekbones that could have been carved from marble, and eyes that held not anger, but something far more dangerous, certainty. "All rise!" the bailiff called again, his voice cracking slightly. The woman took one precise step forward, her heels clicking against the wooden floor like a judge's gavel. The sound seemed to echo in Hargrove's suddenly hollow chest. The laughter died in Judge Hargrove's throat as a clear, steady voice cut through the silence. "Your Honor, I'm counsel for the defense." The young woman's words rang out with quiet dignity. Not a trace of anger or hurt colored her tone, just calm professionalism that made the judge's earlier mockery feel even more inappropriate. Whispers rippled through the gallery. Church ladies exchanged meaningful looks. The veterans in the back row sat up, straighter, their weathered faces showing a mix of surprise and respect. "I am Imani Reed," she continued, reaching into her leather briefcase. "I'll present my credentials now." She placed her bar card and case filings on the lectern with precise movements. The sound of shuffling papers seemed unnaturally loud in the tense courtroom. Evelyn Price, the clerk who had served in this courthouse for over 30 years, picked up the documents. Her hands trembled slightly as she examined them. Her eyes widened with recognition. "Everything is in order, Your Honor," Evelyn said, her voice carrying a note of awe. "Ms. Reed's bar credentials are current and valid." Imani stood perfectly still, hands clasped in front of her. "For the record, I completed law school at age 15 through an accelerated program. I passed the bar exam shortly after and have been practicing criminal defense law for 4 years now." More murmurs filled the courtroom. Judge Hargrove's face had lost its earlier smugness. The color drained from his cheeks as understanding dawned. This wasn't just any young lawyer he had publicly mocked. This was Imani Reed, the legal prodigy, whose brilliant courtroom strategies had made headlines. "I've won 17 consecutive acquittals in similar cases," Imani added quietly. "My work has been cited in the Harvard Law Review twice." The judge's hands gripped the edges of his bench. His earlier laughter now felt like a noose around his neck. Every person in that packed gallery had witnessed his cruel dismissal of her. The court reporter's fingers had captured every word. His stomach churned as he imagined how this would look in the local paper, or worse, in a formal complaint. "We'll take a brief recess," he announced, his voice rough. "Counsel in my chambers. Now." The heavy wooden door closed behind them with a solid thunk. Judge Hargrove's chambers smelled of old leather and polish, the walls lined with law books and photographs of his proudest moments. Those victories felt hollow now. Imani stood straight-backed before his desk, neither aggressive nor submissive. "Your Honor, I want to be clear about my position." The judge braced himself for the threat of a formal complaint, for demands of public apology for the end of his career. "My only goal is to ensure Mr. Bell receives a fair trial," she said instead. "If you can guarantee that, starting now, I see no need to make this morning's incident into something larger." Her offer of grace hung in the air between them. The judge managed a stiff nod, relief warring with shame. Back in the courtroom, Assistant DA Brent Kincaid rose immediately. His expensive suit and practiced smile couldn't hide the predatory gleam in his eyes. "Your Honor, while Ms. Reed's academic achievements are unusual, we have concerns about her limited real-world experience," he said smoothly. "This is a serious felony case. The state offers Mr. Bell 5 years with 3 suspended, if he pleads guilty today." Luther Bell's weathered hands clenched in his lap. The veteran's cap he'd worn proudly to court now lay crumpled between his fingers. Imani's response was measured. "My client maintains his innocence. We're prepared for trial." Movement near the back of the courtroom caught Judge Hargrove's eye. A man in a crisp suit had slipped into the last row, Marcus Thompson from the State Court Administrator's office. He was taking notes. Cold sweat beaded on the judge's forehead. Thompson's presence meant this wasn't just about Luther Bell anymore. Every decision, every word, would be scrutinized. One misstep could end 30 years on the bench. The morning's simple assault case had become a powder keg, and Judge Clayton Hargrove, trapped between his prejudices and his pride, sat at the center of it all. The holding area smelled like old coffee and floor cleaner. Imani followed the corrections officer down a narrow hallway lined with small interview rooms. Through the wire-reinforced windows, she caught glimpses of other attorneys meeting clients, all of them older than her, most looking tired and rushed. The officer unlocked room 3. 15 minutes, Miss Reed. Luther Bell sat at a metal table, shoulders curved inward, his weathered hands trembling slightly on the scratched surface. His Sunday suit, probably his only suit, was wrinkled from sitting in the holding cell. When he looked up, his eyes held something worse than fear, resignation. "Miss Reed, I'm so sorry," he said softly. "Bringing trouble to someone like you, Mr. Bell." Imani's voice was gentle but firm as she took the seat across from him. "You haven't brought me any trouble. That's not how this works." She placed her legal pad on the table. "What I need right now is your story. The whole story exactly as it happened. Every detail matters." Luther's hands settled slightly. "You sure you want to hear it all?" Every word. He took a deep breath. "It was Tuesday morning, about 9:30. I'd gone to pick up my blood pressure medicine. Was heading back to my car when I heard voices, sharp ones, by the side entrance." Imani's pen moved steadily across the yellow paper as Luther's story unfolded. "Young fellow had a lady backed up against the wall. She was trying to leave, but he kept stepping in close, saying things no woman should have to hear." Luther's jaw tightened. "I've seen that look before, when someone's scared but trying not to show it. What did you do?" "What anyone should do. I walked over, real calm-like. Said, 'Excuse me, ma'am, is everything all right here?' Just tried to break it up with words." He shook his head slowly. "That fellow," he spun around, started yelling, said things I won't repeat. The lady, she took her chance and ran. Then what happened? He came at me. I put my hands up, kept backing away. Told him I didn't want any trouble. That's when someone called the police and, well," Luther's voice grew quiet. "You know how it looks when they show up and see an old black man and a young white one." Imani noticed the missing pieces. Where were the security cameras pointing? Right at that side entrance. Clear view of everything. And the woman who ran. Did anyone get her statement? Luther's eyes held a familiar pain. "Police report says they couldn't locate her, but Miss Reed, I saw her trying to talk to an officer, saw her pointing back at that young man, then someone led her away." Imani wrote quickly, connecting dots. No security footage in evidence. A witness somehow unlisted, rushed charges without basic investigation. She'd seen this pattern before, the quick assumption of guilt, the missing pieces that would show the truth. She looked up at Luther. His hands had steadied some, but his eyes still carried decades of seeing justice skip past his door. "Mr. Bell," she met his gaze directly. "I believe you, and I promise you this, we are not letting them bury your truth under a false story, not this time." Something flickered in Luther's expression, not quite hope yet, but maybe its first spark. Back upstairs, Imani moved fast. She filed 3 motions in rapid succession, one for reasonable bond, one for immediate evidence preservation, and one demanding the pharmacy's security footage and all dispatch recordings. Each motion was precise, detailed, backed by statute and precedent. When court reconvened for the afternoon session, Imani took her place at the defense table. She felt Luther watching her from the defendant's chair, still cautious, still carrying the weight of a system that had rarely been kind to men, like him. But something had shifted, in the way he held his shoulders, in the steady way he faced forward now. He wasn't alone anymore, and this time, the truth would have a real voice in court. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall courthouse windows as everyone settled back into their places. The wood paneling seemed to absorb the tension in the room, making the air feel thick and heavy. Luther Bell sat straight-backed at the defense table, his weathered hands folded neatly in front of him. Assistant District Attorney Brent Kincaid rose first, straightening his tie with practiced confidence. "Your Honor, the state requests continued detention. Mr. Bell represents a clear danger to the community. The alleged assault—" "Objection!" Imani's voice cut through the air like a bell. "Counsel is mischaracterizing the charges. There's been no finding of probable cause." Judge Hargrove cleared his throat. "Sustained. What's your characterizations, Mr. Kincaid?" Kincaid's jaw tightened slightly. "The defendant's actions at the pharmacy demonstrate volatile behavior, public safety demands." "If I may, Your Honor." Imani stood, her navy suit crisp in the afternoon light. "The defense would like to present facts about Mr. Bell that directly address the bond criteria." The judge nodded, his earlier mockery replaced by careful neutrality. Imani moved with quiet purpose. Mr. Bell is a Vietnam-era veteran who served with honor. He's lived in the same house on Oak Street for 43 years. He's been the maintenance supervisor at First Baptist Church for over 3 decades. She gestured to the gallery where several church members nodded in confirmation. More importantly, she continued, producing a manila folder, Court Clerk Evelyn Price has confirmed that Mr. Bell has never missed a single court appearance. She paused. Because in his 72 years he's never been charged with any crime, the gallery murmured. Luther's eyes stayed fixed on the table in front of him. Furthermore, Imani added, Mr. Bell has deep community ties. Pastor Williams is here today, willing to speak to Mr. Bell's character and verify his residence. An elderly man in a dark suit stood briefly in the gallery. Judge Hargrove shifted in his seat. The morning's uncomfortable incident seemed to hover between every word. Mr. Kincaid, your response. Your Honor, the defendant's past doesn't change the serious nature, the nature of which hasn't been proven, Imani interjected smoothly. And bond isn't meant to be punitive. It's to ensure appearance and public safety. The judge's fingers drummed lightly on his desk. The court administrator in the back row hadn't moved, hadn't taken a single note, but seemed to absorb everything. Very well, Judge Hargrove said finally. Bond is set at $5,000, with standard conditions. No contact with any alleged victims or witnesses. Regular check-ins with pre-trial services. Luther's shoulders relaxed fraction by fraction, like a man slowly letting go of a weight he'd carried for days. Several people in the gallery wiped their eyes. We accept those conditions. Your Honor, Imani said, already gathering her papers. Within an hour, Luther walked down the courthouse steps into the bright afternoon sun. Church members surged forward to hug him, their faces wet with tears. Camera flashes sparked from the small group of reporters gathered at the bottom of the steps. Imani appeared at Luther's side like a guardian angel, her voice low but firm. Mr. Bell, let's get you home. No comments to anyone about the case, please. She guided him through the crowd with a gentle hand on his elbow, deflecting questions with practiced ease. Mr. Bell is going home to rest. His faith in the justice system remains strong. That's all for now. Luther's old pickup truck sat in the courthouse parking lot, a faded American flag sticker in one corner of the back window. Imani walked him to it, waiting as his trembling hands found the keys. I'll follow you home, she said quietly. Just to make sure you get there safely. Luther's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Yes, ma'am, thank you, ma'am. The drive to Oak Street was short, Imani's sleek car staying a respectful distance behind Luther's truck the whole way. The evening sun painted everything in soft gold as cicadas started their evening chorus. Luther's small house stood neat and proud, with carefully tended flower beds and a clean-swept porch. American flags marked the edges of his yard, not for show but from genuine devotion. They sat in matching rocking chairs on his porch, the wood worn smooth from years of use. Imani opened her briefcase, pulling out a legal pad. Mr. Bell, we start preparing for trial tonight, she said firmly. Not tomorrow, not next week. Tonight. We have work to do. The cicadas hummed their endless song as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. For the first time since his arrest, Luther Bell allowed himself to breathe fully, deeply, like a man surfacing from deep water. The evening sun cast long shadows through Luther Bell's kitchen window as Imani Reed settled at his worn wooden table. A single yellow bulb hung overhead, its warm glow making the small space feel like a sanctuary after the day's courtroom tension. Tell me everything again, Mr. Bell, Imani said, softly, her legal pad ready. Every detail matters. Luther's eyes drifted to the carefully folded American flag displayed in a triangle case on his shelf. Next to it stood a photo of a younger man in uniform, straight-backed and proud. His Bible, its leather cover soft from years of handling, lay within arm's reach on the table. It was just past 10 in the morning, Luther began, his weathered hands wrapped around a coffee mug. I needed my blood pressure pills, that's all I went for. He paused, collecting his thoughts. I heard her first, the young woman. She was saying, please leave me alone, real quiet-like, but scared. You could hear it in her voice. Imani nodded, pen moving steadily. Where exactly was she standing? Right by those newspaper boxes near the entrance. This fellow, must have been 30 or so, had her backed up against them. He kept getting closer, telling her to stop playing hard to get. Then what happened? Luther's shoulders tensed. I didn't raise my voice, didn't make any sudden moves, just walked over and said, "Excuse me, miss. I believe they're calling for you inside." Gave her a chance to slip away. He shook his head slowly. That's when he got mad. Started yelling about me interfering. Called me names I won't repeat in front of you. "The police report says you threatened him," Imani said, gently. "No, ma'am." I kept my hands at my sides, kept my voice steady, just like they taught us in the service. "Don't escalate." Luther's fingers trembled slightly against his mug, but when those officers showed up, they took one look at me and decided who the trouble was. Imani glanced up from her notes. "Mr. Bell, what about security cameras? Did you notice any?" "Yes, ma'am. Big one right above the entrance. Another one on the corner of the building. Can't miss them." Imani pulled out the discovery documents, scanning quickly. "They're listing the footage as unavailable. That's not right." She looked up at Luther. "What are you most afraid of in all this?" Luther was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "I'm tired," he finally said, his voice heavy. "Just bone tired of having to prove I'm human. Every time I walk into a store, every time I try to help someone. Always having to be extra careful, extra polite, and it still doesn't matter." Imani set down her pen. "Mr. Bell, my father served too. Marines. He taught me that a veteran's dignity isn't something that should ever be up for debate." She met his eyes. "That's why I'm here. We're going to subpoena that footage. We're going to challenge every false word in those reports, and we're going to get your good name back." "You really think we can win?" Luther asked. "I know we can. But I need you to stay strong. No matter what they throw at us in that courtroom, you hold your head high. You earned that right." They spent the next hour mapping out every moment, every witness, every detail that could matter. Luther's memory was sharp, his descriptions precise. As the kitchen grew darker, Imani gathered her notes and promised to return tomorrow. Later that night, in her simple motel room, Imani worked under a desk lamp. She pinned index cards to the wall, creating a timeline of the incident. Her phone showed 11:30, but she set her alarm for 5 anyway. The missing security footage nagged at her. Something wasn't right, and she intended to find out what. She stepped back, looking at the timeline one last time. On her dresser, her own father's photo watched over her work. She'd prove worthy of both veterans' trust, the one who raised her and the one who needed her now. The courthouse stood silent in the pre-dawn darkness, its brick walls barely visible against the purple sky. Imani Reed walked up the wide steps, her heels clicking softly as she balanced 2 coffee cups and a thick manila folder under her arm. Her navy suit was crisp, her shoulders straight, ready for another day of quiet battle. The security guard nodded with newfound respect as she passed through the metal detector. Yesterday's whispers had spread fast, the young lawyer who'd stood her ground with dignity when the judge laughed. At the clerk's window, Evelyn Price was already sorting mail, her silver hair neat under the fluorescent lights. She looked up as Imani approached. "Good morning, Mrs. Price," Imani said warmly, setting 1 coffee cup on the counter. "I remembered you mentioned liking hazelnut." Evelyn's eyes crinkled. "Child, you didn't have to do that. Ma'am, my mama raised me right." Imani pulled out a paper from her folder. "I need to ask about something important. The evidence log for Mr. Bell's case, specifically the security footage from Wilson's pharmacy. Could you help me trace it?" Evelyn's smile faded. She glanced down the empty hallway, then lowered her voice. "I've been wondering about that myself." She turned to her computer, fingers tapping efficiently. "The pharmacy says they sent it right after the incident, but the DA's office claims it was never received," Imani finished. "Let me show you something." Evelyn turned her monitor slightly. "See these timestamps? The file came in, right here. But then," she pointed to an odd gap in the digital record. "Someone accessed it from the DA's network. Hours later it's marked, 'Not Received.'" Imani took careful notes, her hand steady despite her racing heart. "Mrs. Price, would you be willing to sign an affidavit about this?" Before Evelyn could answer, heavy footsteps echoed down the marble hall. Judge Hargrove appeared, his usual commanding presence somehow diminished in the early light. He spotted Imani at the clerk's window and his jaw tightened. "Good morning, Your Honor," Imani said politely, gathering her papers. He gave a stiff nod, trying to project authority, but his eyes darted to movement near the building's entrance. A local reporter stood there, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in urgent whispers. "Video's already got thousands of shares," the reporter's voice carried faintly, questioning his fitness for the bench. The judge's face paled. He hurried to his chambers, closing the heavy door behind him. Inside, his hands shook as he unlocked his phone. Messages flooded in, but one from his old law school friend jumped out. "Clay, they're calling for your resignation. That laugh is everywhere." He sank into his leather chair, the one that had always made him feel powerful. Now it just felt cold. On his desk, case files waited, mundane matters of law and order that had seemed so clear yesterday. Today, nothing felt clear. He pulled his black robe from its hook, the fabric suddenly heavy in his hands. The mirror showed a man he barely recognized, pale, uncertain, afraid. Each time he tried to straighten the robe, his fingers fumbled with the zipper. In 20 minutes, he would walk into the pre-trial conference. The same people who had revered him yesterday would be watching, weighing, judging. He tugged at his collar, tried to square his shoulders, but the tremor in his hands wouldn't stop. The wall clock ticked loudly in the silence of his chambers. 9:45. Papers needed signing. Motions needed ruling. But all he could think about was the sound of his own laughter, echoing back at him from thousands of phones, thousands of screens, thousands of people who now saw exactly who he was. He reached for his gavel, the one certainty left in his world. But even that familiar wood felt foreign in his grasp. Everything he'd built over decades, respect, authority, legacy, was crumbling because of one unguarded moment of truth. Outside his door, the bustle of the courthouse grew as people arrived for the morning calendar. He could hear Imani's calm voice discussing logistics with the bailiff, the reporter's footsteps pacing the hall, the soft murmur of courthouse staff trying not to stare at his door. Judge Hargrove stood before the mirror one last time, adjusting his robe like it was armor against the coming storm. But his reflection showed every crack in his carefully maintained facade. His hands still shook as he reached for the door handle, knowing that on the other side, everyone would be watching. Not with respect now, but with something far harder to face. The truth about himself. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall courthouse windows as Assistant District Attorney Brent Kincaid adjusted his silk tie and rose from his chair. His practiced courtroom smile never quite reached his eyes. "Your Honor," he began smoothly, "while we appreciate Ms. Reed's enthusiasm, we have concerns about her limited experience. This is a serious felony case, not a learning opportunity for recent graduates." The gallery shifted uncomfortably. Luther Bell sat perfectly still beside Imani, his weathered hands folded in his lap. Imani stood, her navy suit crisp despite the humid afternoon. "Your Honor, I've handled 17 felony trials in, the past year. My win rate is public record." Her voice remained gentle but firm. "The law doesn't require grey hair for competent representation. It requires knowledge, dedication, and a commitment to justice." Judge Hargrove gripped his gavel tighter, painfully aware of every eye in the room. His earlier mockery of Imani still burned in his throat. "Mr. Kincaid, the defense counsel's credentials are verified. Move on to substantive matters." The sharpness in his tone made several heads turn. Kincaid's smile flickered for just a moment before he reached for a document on his table. "Very well. In the interest of efficiency, the state extends the following plea offer." He held up the paper like a prize. "Mr. Bell pleads guilty to aggravated assault. We recommend 5 years with 3 to serve." A soft gasp came from the church ladies in the back row. Luther's shoulders tensed, but he kept his eyes forward. "And if we decline?" Imani asked quietly. Kincaid's smile widened. "Then we pursue the maximum. 10 years, no parole." He leaned forward slightly. "Clock's ticking, Ms. Reed. Sometimes experience means knowing when to fold." Luther's hand trembled as he reached for the water glass in front of him. Imani placed her hand gently on his arm. "Mr. Bell," she whispered, "this is your choice. Only yours." Luther straightened his tie, the same one he'd worn every court date since 1975. "No, ma'am," he said softly. "I won't plead guilty to something I didn't do." Kincaid's face hardened. "Your Honor, we'll need 48 hours to prepare additional evidence that's recently come to light." "You mean evidence that was somehow misplaced?" Imani asked innocently. "Watch yourself, counselor," Kincaid snapped. "You're not in law school anymore." Judge Hargrove banged his gavel. "That's enough. We'll reconvene Wednesday at 9. He stood quickly, desperate to escape the tension in the room. After court, Imani walked Luther to his old pickup truck in the courthouse parking lot. The late afternoon heat shimmered off the asphalt. "The next 2 days will be hard," she told him honestly. "Mr. Kincaid is angry, which means he's scared. But we have truth on our side, Mr. Bell. Hold on to that." Luther nodded, his eyes tired but determined. "My daddy taught me that a man's word is all he really has in this world. I can't say I did wrong when I know I did right." Later that evening, Judge Clayton Hargrove sat at his dining room table, pushing food around his plate, while his wife Ada watched him with growing frustration. The ceiling fan spun lazily overhead, doing little to dispel the heaviness in the air. "Clayton," Ada finally said, setting down her fork, "we need to talk about what happened in that courtroom." "Ada, please, I've had a long day, and that young lady had a horrible one thanks to you." Ada's voice was quiet but firm. "You humiliated her in front of everyone, and Mr. Bell, a man who's cleaned our church for 20 years. I made a mistake, I've apologized. A mistake is getting someone's name wrong. What you did wasn't a mistake. It was sin." Ada's words fell like stones in still water. "You saw her skin and her age and decided she didn't belong in your courtroom. That's pride and prejudice, Clayton. Plain and simple." Hargrove pushed back from the table. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. The media's involved now. The State Judiciary Commission—" "I understand perfectly," Ada cut in. "You're more worried about saving your reputation than doing what's right." She stood and gathered the plates, her movements sharp with disappointment. "I've kept quiet too many times, watching you hide behind that robe, not tonight." Later, in the darkness of their living room, Judge Hargrove sat alone with his judicial robe spread across his lap. The black fabric felt heavier than usual. Ada's words echoed in his mind. Pride and prejudice. Sin, not mistake. He ran his fingers over the robe's sleeve, remembering the day he was sworn in. He'd promised to uphold justice with fairness and impartiality. Today, his wife had named the truth he'd been avoiding. He'd broken that promise the moment he laughed at Imani Reed. The grandfather clock ticked steadily in the corner, marking time as Clayton Hargrove sat in the dark, finally facing the man beneath the robe. The morning sun filtered through stained glass windows at First Baptist, where the monthly prayer breakfast filled the fellowship hall with the smell of coffee and warm biscuits. Ada Hargrove sat at a corner table, watching as elderly women fussed over Luther Bell, who kept his eyes down and his thank yous soft. "That man fixed my whole front porch last summer," Mrs. Mitchell announced, patting Luther's shoulder. Her white hair caught the light as she shook her head. "Wouldn't take a dime for it neither. Just said, 'God bless,' and went on his way." Several heads nodded. Sarah Thompson, who'd taught 3rd grade for 40 years, added, "Luther's been keeping our church clean for decades. Never missed a Sunday, rain or shine." The support wasn't loud or showy, just quiet certainty from people who'd known Luther's character across years of small kindnesses. Ada noticed how some of the white church members made sure to speak up, their words carrying extra weight in this moment. The side door opened, and Imani Reed stepped in, crisp in her navy suit despite the early hour. The room hushed for a moment before Mrs. Mitchell waved her over. "Join us for prayer, child." Without hesitation, but also without drama, Imani joined the circle of linked hands. Pastor Williams kept it simple. "Lord, let truth be seen and justice done." There were soft amens all around. Imani squeezed Luther's shoulder as she left, heading straight for the courthouse. Her heels clicked purposefully on the marble floors as she arranged her files at the defense table. Judge Hargrove entered, and the room rose. Instead of launching straight into proceedings, he cleared his throat. "Before we begin jury selection, I need to address something." His voice carried the weight of practiced words. "My comment during Monday's session was inappropriate and unprofessional. I apologize to counsel and to this court, without qualification or excuse." Imani stood, her posture straight but not rigid. "The defense accepts your honor's apology." She paused, then added with quiet firmness, "We trust those words will be matched by fair treatment as we proceed." The jury selection began, filling hours with careful questions that revealed the town's hidden assumptions. One potential juror mentioned, "Those troublemakers always causing problems," while another admitted, I just feel safer when certain people aren't around. Imani's approach was steady and gentle, but she never let prejudice hide behind polite words. When you say those people, she'd ask, who exactly do you mean? Her questions weren't angry. They simply turned on lights in dark corners. By late afternoon, 12 jurors and 2 alternates were sworn in. The panel looked fairly balanced, a mix of ages and backgrounds, some who'd nodded at Luther's name, and others who seemed genuinely neutral. That's when Brent Kincaid rose, straightening his expensive tie. Your Honor, the state wishes to notify the court of an additional witness we intend to call. His smile was thin as a paper cut. We'll provide the required notice by morning. Imani's face remained calm, though her pen pressed a fraction harder against her legal pad. She'd seen this move before. Last-minute witnesses usually meant manufactured testimony or pressure applied in dark corners. The judge glanced between counsel. File your notice properly, Mr. Kincaid. We'll address any objections tomorrow. He sounded tired but level, no hint of his earlier bias showing through. The gallery emptied slowly, afternoon sun slanting through tall windows. Imani gathered her files, nodding goodbye to Luther as his church friends escorted him home. She paused on the courthouse steps, drawing in the warm air. One day at a time, she whispered to herself. Then she headed for her car, mind already turning to tomorrow's preparation. Behind her, the massive courthouse doors closed with a sound like thunder, sealing away the day's small victories and gathering storms. Inside, empty wooden benches held the echo of promises, some kept, some still to be tested. Imani sat cross-legged on the motel bed, surrounded by yellow legal pads and color-coded files. The bedside lamp cast a warm glow over her careful notes as she dialed the number she'd gotten from witness statements. The phone rang 4 times before a woman's hesitant voice answered. Hello? Mrs. Sarah Martinez, this is Imani Reed. I'm an attorney working on the Luther Bell case. Imani kept her voice soft, like she was talking to a frightened bird. I understand you were there at Parker's pharmacy that day. There was a long pause. I don't want any trouble. I know you're scared, Mrs. Martinez, but Mr. Bell stepped up to help you that day, didn't he? Now he needs someone to stand up for him. Sarah's voice trembled. That younger man, he was so angry. I was just trying to get my prescription. He wouldn't let me pass. She took a shaky breath. Mr. Bell, he just asked him politely to let me by. He was so calm about it. Would you be willing to meet with me tomorrow? Somewhere safe, like the library or your church? Imani reached for her notepad. Your testimony could keep an innocent man from prison. They said if I talked. Sarah's voice faded. Who threatened you, Mrs. Martinez? Not directly, but someone came by. Said it would be better if I remembered things right. Imani's pen pressed hard against the paper. I can request witness protection if needed. But right now I just need the truth from someone brave enough to tell it. After another long pause, Sarah whispered, The library, 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Dawn broke cold and clear the next day. The courthouse steps were still wet with dew as people filed in for trial. Luther sat straight-backed at the defense table in his pressed suit, hands folded carefully in front of him. Brent Kincaid rose for his opening statement, all polish and practiced intensity. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about a man who chose violence, who turned a simple disagreement into a dangerous assault. The evidence will show that Mr. Bell... He painted a picture of anger and threat, each word designed to stir old fears. When Imani stood, she didn't match Kincaid's theatre. She simply walked to the jury box and spoke like she was sharing truth with neighbors. This case is about a Tuesday afternoon at Parker's pharmacy, about an elderly veteran who saw someone in trouble and did what good neighbors do. He helped. He used words, not fists. He chose peace, not violence. She let her gaze touch each juror. And then he watched as people looked at his skin instead of his actions, his age instead of his honor. The evidence will show that Mr. Bell is exactly who his community knows him to be, a gentle man who serves his church, helps his neighbors, and deserves better than false accusations. Officer James Morton took the stand first, crisp in his uniform. He testified about responding to a disturbance call and finding a volatile situation. During cross-examination, Imani approached with quiet respect. Officer Morton, did you review the pharmacy's security footage before filing your report? No, ma'am. I was told it wasn't available. Who told you that? I don't recall exactly. Did you interview Mrs. Martinez before deciding Mr. Bell was the aggressor? The officer shifted. She seemed upset. I didn't want to traumatize her further. So you made assumptions based on what you thought you saw, rather than investigating what actually happened. Objection. Kincaid stood. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Hargrove said. But the damage was done. Jurors exchanged glances, and one woman in the back row frowned thoughtfully. When the lunch recess was called, Evelyn Price caught Imani's elbow in the hallway. Her hands trembled as she passed over a small piece of paper. I found something in the digital archives, the pharmacy video. There's a storage tag for it in the IT system, reference number and everything. Imani studied the paper, hope rising carefully in her chest. It still exists. In the courthouse's digital repository. They back up everything these days. Evelyn glanced around. We need to check right after lunch before anyone realizes. Meet me at the clerk's office computer station, Imani whispered. And Evelyn, thank you for doing what's right. They stood in the marble hallway, two women of different generations, united by a simple belief. Truth matters. The lunch hour ticked away as they prepared to chase down evidence that could change everything. Around them, the old courthouse creaked and settled, its wooden, bones holding decades of verdicts, some just, some not. But today felt different. Today, hidden in servers and digital archives, truth waited to be found. The basement corridor of the courthouse felt cooler than the floors above. Fluorescent lights hummed as Evelyn's sensible shoes clicked against worn linoleum, leading Imani past rows of metal filing cabinets toward a door marked Records and IT. Nobody much comes down here anymore, Evelyn said, fishing out an old key. Most everything's digital now, but they keep the old systems running just in case. The room smelled of dust and warm electronics. A dated computer monitor sat on a metal desk, surrounded by thick binders with faded labels. Evelyn settled into the creaking chair and typed with practiced fingers. That archive tag you found, she asked. Let's see what it tells us. Imani stood close, watching the screen. Her heart beat faster as Evelyn navigated through folders and subfolders. Minutes ticked by. There, Evelyn said suddenly, pointing. Upload date matches the incident. Files marked partial. Might be corrupted, but... She double-clicked. The video player opened, showing grainy black-and-white footage of the pharmacy entrance. Imani leaned closer, squinting at the timestamp. This is it, she breathed. We need to notify the court immediately. Upstairs, the afternoon session began with Imani's careful groundwork. She recalled the officer to establish time and location markers, then approached the bench. Your Honor, new evidence has been located in the courthouse archive system. We're prepared to authenticate and play a video clip relevant to the incident in question. The courtroom stirred. Luther sat very still at the defense table, hands folded in his lap. Judge Hargrove looked down at Imani, his expression guarded. Mr. Kincaid, the DA was already on his feet. Objection, Your Honor. Defense counsel hasn't established proper chain of custody. We have no way to verify this mysterious footage's authenticity. The timestamp and location markers match police reports, Imani responded calmly. The responding officer has just confirmed the general setting. We can lay additional foundation. The defense is attempting to circumvent proper discovery, Kincaid interrupted. This last-minute evidence is highly suspicious. Hargrove raised his hand for silence. The gallery watched him, waiting. His collar felt tight. I'll allow a preliminary viewing, he said finally. Subject to a full hearing tomorrow morning on authenticity and admissibility. Proceed with caution, Ms. Reed. Imani nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. The lights dimmed. The projector hummed to life, throwing blue-white light onto the pull-down screen. The grainy footage showed the pharmacy entrance, cars passing on the street. A young man appeared, moving aggressively toward a woman backing away from him. Her body language screamed fear, shoulders hunched, hands up. Then Luther Bell entered the frame. The courtroom watched as Luther stepped between them, keeping his distance, hands open and visible. His posture was non-threatening, but firm. His mouth moved, speaking words the silent video couldn't capture. The younger man jabbed a finger toward Luther's chest. Luther didn't move, didn't raise his hands, just stood his ground, protecting the frightened woman behind him. Objection! Kincaid's voice cut through the quiet. This footage could be edited. We have no way to verify. Noted, Hargrove said. Continue, Ms. Reed. The clip played out. When the police arrived, the confusion was visible. Officers rushing in, the younger man pointing and shouting, Luther being pushed against a wall despite his calm compliance. Imani stopped the playback. In the returning light, she saw several jurors wiping their eyes. The gallery was completely silent. Luther sat with tears running down his weathered cheeks. Not tears of victory, tears of a man who had carried truth alone for too long. Your Honor, Imani said quietly, we request the footage be marked as Defense Exhibit A, subject to tomorrow's hearing. So marked, Hargrove replied, his voice rougher than usual. We'll reconvene at 9 a.m. to address admissibility. Court is adjourned for today. The bang of the gavel seemed to wake everyone from a spell. The reporter's pencil flew across his notepad. People began whispering, looking at Luther with new eyes. Outside, the late afternoon sun felt warm on Imani's face as she walked Luther to his truck. His hands were shaking slightly. Remember to breathe, she told him gently. We've shown them the truth, but we still need to get that footage formally admitted. One step at a time. Luther nodded, fumbling with his keys. Yes, ma'am, seeing it like that. I know. She squeezed his arm. Go home. Rest. Tomorrow's another fight. She watched until his truck disappeared around the corner, then checked her phone. She had work to do before morning. Research to back up the footage's authenticity, motions to draft, foundation to build. The truth was finally visible. Now she had to make it count. The morning sun filtered through the courthouse's tall windows as attorneys, staff, and observers filed into the courtroom for the critical evidentiary hearing. Judge Hargrove's chamber's door opened precisely at 8:30. His face looked drawn, like he hadn't slept. Imani stood at the lectern, her navy suit pressed crisp despite the early hour. She had arranged her exhibits in careful order, time-stamped records, system logs, and the archive documentation that proved the footage's existence within official channels. Your Honor, she began, her voice steady and clear, the timeline is straightforward. The pharmacy security system automatically uploaded footage to law enforcement. Our records show it was received, logged, and stored. The archive tag proves it remained in the system. She walked the court through each step, laying foundation brick by brick. The judge watched with intense focus, his fingers pressed against his temple. Evelyn Price approached the witness stand, her grey hair neatly pinned back, hands clasped in her lap. Though her voice was soft, her testimony rang with 30 years of experience. Yes, I can confirm the footage was logged into our system on May 3rd at 9:47 a.m., Evelyn said, pointing to the entry in the court's digital records. The file size and format match standard security footage. It was marked as evidence in this case. Kincaid's cross-examination turned aggressive. Isn't it possible someone tampered with these records? No, sir, Evelyn replied. The system tracks every access. No one modified these entries. Judge Hargrove leaned forward, studying the exhibits. His complexion was pale, but his voice came out firm. The court finds proper foundation has been established. The footage is admissible. He straightened in his chair. This court's primary duty is to seek truth. We will not ignore relevant evidence. When the jury returned, Imani called the younger man from the pharmacy incident, James Turner, to the stand. The overhead screens flickered to life as she played the footage frame by frame. Mr. Turner, this shows you approaching Ms. Wilson at the pharmacy entrance, correct? Yeah, but I was just talking to her. Imani advanced the video. Your hand is on her arm here. Was that just talking? Turner shifted in his seat. She was walking away. I wanted to finish our conversation. And when Mr. Bell stepped between you, Imani paused the footage. Your response was to lunge forward. He got in. My face. Turner's voice rose. The video shows Mr. Bell standing still, hands open. Did you lunge at him because he interrupted your confrontation with Ms. Wilson? Turner's face flushed. He looked at Kincaid, then back at Imani. Fine. Yeah, I grabbed her first. And yeah, I came at the old man when he got involved. But he had no right. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Several jurors exchanged knowing glances, while others scribbled in their notebooks. Luther Bell sat straighter at the defense table, dignity returning to his bearing. By mid-afternoon, the case had shifted dramatically. The video evidence, combined with Turner's admissions, had punctured the prosecution's narrative. Even Kincaid's usual confidence seemed deflated as he shuffled papers at his table. The clock struck 4, and Judge Hargrove called the day's end. As people filed out, Deputy Matthews approached the bench with a sealed envelope. "For your chambers, Your Honor." Marked urgent. Behind his chamber doors, Hargrove broke the seal. His hands trembled as he read the ethics complaint against Imani Reed. The allegations were carefully crafted: improper influence over court staff, unauthorized access to secured systems, manipulation of evidence. He sank into his leather chair, bow tie suddenly too tight. The complaint could derail the entire trial. More than that, it forced an impossible choice: protect his career by acting on false allegations, or risk everything by standing firm. Ada's words from breakfast echoed in his mind. "You can't buy peace with cowardice, Clayton." The envelope sat heavy on his desk as shadows lengthened across the room. His robe felt like lead on his shoulders, and the silence pressed in like a physical weight. The afternoon sun slanted through the high courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Judge Clayton Hargrove's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his reading glasses, the ethics complaint lying heavy on the bench before him. "Court will come to order for emergency motions," he announced, his voice carrying less authority than usual. The gallery shifted and whispered. News traveled fast in small towns, and the ethics complaint against Imani Reed was already the talk of the courthouse steps. Luther Bell sat at the defense table, his weathered hands folded tightly in his lap, while Imani maintained her characteristic poise beside him. Assistant District Attorney Brent Kincaid rose, practically vibrating with manufactured outrage. "Your Honor, this is a shocking breach of judicial integrity. Ms. Reed clearly manipulated court staff to access restricted materials. The footage must be excluded immediately." "That's a serious allegation, Counselor," Hargrove said, his eyes darting between Kincaid and the state court administrator in the back row. "More than serious, Your Honor. It's disqualifying." Kincaid's voice rose. "The entire defense case is now tainted by improper conduct." Imani stood slowly, her calm presence a stark contrast to Kincaid's theatrical display. "Your Honor, if I may respond." The judge nodded, sweat beading at his temples. "The court deserves time to properly review any complaint," Imani said evenly. "But Mr. Bell's constitutional rights cannot be held hostage to intimidation tactics. The footage was properly archived in court systems. Its discovery through legal channels cannot be twisted into misconduct simply because it reveals truth." Luther's eyes stayed fixed on the table, shoulders curved under the weight of yet another system working against him. Hargrove's collar felt too tight. The ethics complaint could trigger an investigation into everything, including his own conduct from day one, his reputation, his pension, his legacy, all of it hung by a thread. Fear won. "In light of these serious allegations," he began, hating the tremor in his voice, "the court must temporarily suspend use of the video evidence pending a full review of proper protocols." He cleared his throat. "Additionally, given the heightened scrutiny of this matter, defendant supervision conditions will be increased until tomorrow's session." The gallery erupted in whispers. Luther's face crumpled, not in anger, but in deep, familiar disappointment. It was the face of a man who'd seen this story before. Truth buried under procedure, justice lost to fear. "Your Honor," Imani began, "Mr. Bell has followed every condition perfectly. There's no basis. This is procedure, Counselor, not punishment." But Hargrove couldn't meet her steady gaze. Two deputies moved toward Luther. Imani touched his arm gently. "Mr. Bell," she said softly, "look at me." When he raised his tired eyes, she continued, "This will not stand. I promise you that. Stay strong for me tonight." Luther nodded once, then let the deputies lead him away. His shoulders were straight, but his steps were heavy with resignation. The reporter's pen hadn't stopped moving, capturing every detail of the moment justice stumbled backward. Evelyn Price, the clerk, stared at her hands, unable to watch. Even some jurors, waiting to be dismissed, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Later that evening, Hargrove sat in his study, tie loosened, staring unseeing at law books that had once seemed to hold such clear answers. The house was quiet except for the soft clink of Ada clearing dinner dishes. A dinner where he'd barely spoken 2 words. He heard her footsteps approach but didn't turn. She entered silently and placed something on his desk, her worn Bible, the one she'd had since college. "Clayton," she said quietly, "I've kept peace in this house for 40 years by staying quiet when I shouldn't have. Not tonight." He finally looked up at her. In the soft lamplight, her face was gentle but absolutely certain. "Tomorrow," she continued, "you have to choose between protecting your reputation and protecting what's right. You can't serve both anymore. Ada, you don't understand what's at stake." "I understand perfectly. You're afraid. But fear isn't an excuse for failing to do what's right." She touched the Bible softly. "Truth costs sometimes, Clayton. The question is whether we're willing to pay." She left him there, alone with his thoughts and his heavy judicial robe draped across the chair. He stared at it for a long time, remembering how proud he'd been the day he first put it on. Now it felt like it might suffocate him. The clock ticked steadily in the quiet study. Outside his window, crickets sang their evening songs, same as always, but nothing felt the same anymore. His carefully built world of authority and respect was crumbling, and he didn't know how to save it, or if he even should try. He reached out one hand and touched the robe's fabric, the weight of tomorrow's choice pressing down on him like a physical thing. Truth or reputation, courage or comfort. The path forward had never felt more unclear or more important. The courthouse stood dark and silent at 5:30 in the morning, empty except for the cleaning crew and a few early bird clerks. Imani Reed's heels clicked softly on the marble floor as she made her way to a small room tucked away on the second floor. The sign read simply, "Prayer Room." Inside, morning light barely filtered through a narrow window. A wooden bench, worn smooth by years of worried hands, faced a plain cross on the wall. Imani settled onto the bench, her navy suit jacket folded neatly beside her. "Lord," she whispered, "I'm not asking for revenge, just clarity. Show me how to fight for truth without letting bitterness win." Her phone buzzed. A text from Luther. "Didn't sleep, praying too." The door creaked open. Evelyn Price rushed in, still catching her breath, clutching a manila folder. Her grey hair was escaping its usual neat bun. "Miss Reed," she whispered urgently, "I found something. Look at these timestamps." Evelyn's hands trembled as she spread out printed emails and system logs on the bench. The evidence was clear. The DA's office had received the pharmacy footage weeks ago, long before claiming it was missing. "There's more," Evelyn said. "Internal logs show they accessed the file multiple times before marking it unavailable. They knew exactly what it showed." Imani studied each page carefully, her expression calm, but her eyes bright with purpose. Together they moved to the clerk's office where Evelyn's ancient printer hummed to life. They assembled exhibits, labeled everything precisely, and prepared an emergency motion addressing the misconduct. By 9:45 the courtroom was packed. Luther sat at the defense table, shoulders straight despite his exhaustion. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, catching dust motes in shafts of light. When Judge Hargrove entered, his robe seemed to hang heavier than usual. "Court is in session," he announced, voice clipped. Imani rose smoothly. "Your Honor, the defense requests immediate consideration of an emergency motion regarding evidence misconduct." She approached the bench with the motion and exhibits. Her voice stayed measured, professional, no hint of triumph or accusation. "These records show conclusively that the prosecution received and reviewed the security footage well before claiming it was unavailable." The gallery rustled with whispers. In the back row, the state court administrator leaned forward slightly, pen poised. Hargrove studied the timestamps and logs, his jaw working. His eyes darted between the documents, the crowded gallery, and Assistant DA Kincaid's reddening face. Kincaid shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. These logs could be manipulated. This is just another attempt to—" "The timestamps are system-generated and encrypted," Imani interrupted quietly. "They cannot be altered." From her seat in the third row, Ada Hargrove watched her husband. When he glanced her way, she met his gaze steadily. Not angry, not pleading, just present with the truth. The judge's hands trembled slightly as he shuffled the papers. "This court will take a 15-minute recess to review these materials," he announced. In chambers, Hargrove sank into his leather chair. The morning sun warmed his back through tall windows, but he felt cold. His eyes fell on Luther's file. The veteran's service photo stared back at him. Then he remembered Imani's dignity in the face of his laughter. her quiet strength against Kincaid's attacks. The clock ticked steadily. Outside his door, he could hear the murmur of waiting voices. When bailiff knocked to signal time, Hargrove stood slowly. He straightened his robe, touched the small crosspin on his lapel, and took a deep breath. "All rise," called the bailiff as he returned to the courtroom. Hargrove settled into his chair, leaned forward to the microphone, and spoke in a low, firm voice. "Before we proceed, I have several matters to address on the record." The room went completely still, every eye fixed on the judge as he prepared to speak his truth, whatever the cost. The morning sun filtered through the tall courthouse windows as Judge Clayton Hargrove adjusted his reading glasses. The packed courtroom held its breath. Even the usual creaks of the old wooden benches had gone silent. "Before we proceed," Hargrove began, his voice carrying the weight of decades on the bench, "I need to address several matters on the record." He paused, hands flat on the bench before him. The state court administrator in the back row leaned forward slightly. "First, I must acknowledge my conduct at the start of these proceedings." His eyes met Imani's. "My treatment of Ms. Reed was not just inappropriate, it was wrong. It revealed a bias I didn't want to see in myself. I won't diminish this by blaming stress or age or tradition. The fault was mine alone." Ada, seated in her usual spot, nodded almost imperceptibly. Luther Bell sat straight-backed beside Imani, his weathered hands folded in his lap. "Second, regarding the evidence matters before us." Hargrove lifted the time-stamped documents. "These logs clearly show the prosecution had access to the pharmacy security footage well before trial. The delayed disclosure and subsequent attempts to exclude this evidence are deeply troubling." Assistant DA Kincaid shifted in his chair, his polished demeanor cracking. "Therefore, I am denying the ethics complaint against Ms. Reed. It appears to be retaliatory in nature." Hargrove's voice grew stronger. "Furthermore, I commend Mrs. Price for her diligence in maintaining proper records. Her integrity helped preserve the truth." Evelyn dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her other hand still taking notes. "I am referring the prosecution's conduct in this matter for review by the appropriate authorities. This court will not reward intimidation tactics or the suppression of evidence." The judge called a brief recess to recall the jury. When they filed in, their faces showed the strain of the past days. Imani rose, calm and focused. "Your Honor, the defense requests permission to play the complete security footage." "Granted," Hargrove said without hesitation. The lights dimmed. On the screen, the grainy but clear footage showed the pharmacy entrance. A young woman backed away from a tall man, her body language screaming fear. Luther appeared at the edge of the frame, moving with deliberate calm. He stepped between them, hands open and visible. When the angry man lunged, Luther simply stepped back, maintaining distance without aggression. Jurors leaned forward. Several made notes. One older woman removed her glasses to wipe her eyes. In his closing argument, Kincaid tried to salvage his case, but his words rang hollow against the visual truth. When Imani rose for her closing, she spoke with quiet conviction. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case asks one thing. Will you judge people by evidence or by assumptions? The footage shows Mr. Bell doing exactly what his neighbors have known him to do for decades, protecting others with dignity and restraint. The truth was always there. It just needed to be seen." The jury retired to deliberate. Luther sat perfectly still, like a man bracing for impact. Imani placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Less than 2 hours later, the bailiff announced their return. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Hargrove asked. The foreperson stood, paper steady in her hands. "We have, Your Honor. We find the defendant, Luther Bell, not guilty." Luther's knees buckled slightly. Imani caught his arm, supporting him as he steadied himself. Across the courtroom, faces broke into smiles. Someone in the gallery whispered, "Thank Jesus." Judge Hargrove's eyes glistened with tears he didn't try to hide. "The verdict is recorded. Mr. Bell, you are free to go. This court is adjourned." The gavel fell with quiet finality. Outside the courtroom doors, Luther stopped. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I thought I'd die with people believing the worst." Imani squeezed his arm gently. "Not today." The morning light streamed through the courthouse windows, touching everything with gold. The late afternoon sun slanted through the courthouse's tall windows, painting golden stripes across the marble floor. Luther Bell stood at the defense table, his weathered hands steady for the first time in months. Beside him, Imani Reed gathered her papers with calm precision, while across the aisle, Assistant DA Kincaid sat deflated, his legal pad untouched. People filed out slowly, their whispers echoing off the high ceiling. On the courthouse steps a small crowd had gathered, church ladies in their best dresses, veterans wearing caps decorated with service pins, and neighbors who'd known Luther for decades. As Luther emerged into the sunlight, a soft applause began. It started with just a few hands, then spread like a wave, growing warmer and fuller until the sound wrapped around him like an embrace. Mrs. Johnson from his church dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. Two fellow veterans stepped forward to shake his hand, their grip firm and respectful. Reporters clustered at the bottom of the steps, notepads and microphones ready. One young journalist called out, "Ms. Reed, what are your thoughts on Judge Hargrove's actions today?" Imani paused, her navy suit crisp in the golden light. "Accountability is never easy," she said softly. "But when we face it with courage, it can heal more than just one person. It can heal a whole community." Evelyn Price, the court clerk, pushed through the crowd and wrapped Luther in a tight hug. "We always knew who you really were," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Luther patted her back gently, his own eyes glistening. As evening settled over the town, cars filled the parking lot at First Baptist Church. Inside the fellowship hall, folding tables groaned under the weight of covered dishes, Mrs. Peterson's famous potato salad, Rebecca's cornbread, and enough fried chicken to feed half the county. The walls were decorated with American flags and hand-lettered signs reading, "Welcome home, Luther, and thank you for your service." Veterans in their worn caps sat in places of honor near the front. Luther's pastor stood to offer grace, his prayer touching on themes of justice and mercy without pointing fingers. The room filled with quiet amens. Sarah Mitchell, whose porch Luther had fixed last winter, stood shakily with her walker. "I want to thank Luther Bell," she announced, her voice thin but clear. "Not just for helping folks like me with repairs they can't afford, but for always being the kind of man who protects people who need protecting. That's what he did at that pharmacy, and that's what he's done his whole life." Near the back of the room, Judge Clayton Hargrove sat beside Ada, looking smaller somehow without his judicial robe. He wore a plain grey suit and kept his eyes forward, accepting the sideways. Glances from others without flinching, Ada's hand rested steady on his arm. After the formal speeches ended and people began gathering their empty casserole dishes, Hargrove made his way through the crowd to where Luther stood. The room grew quieter, conversations dropping to whispers. "Mr. Bell," Hargrove said, his voice rough with emotion, "I need to apologize to you properly, not just for what happened in my courtroom that first day, but for everything that followed. I let fear keep me from doing right immediately. I endangered your freedom because I was trying to protect myself. There's no excuse for that." Luther studied the judge's face for a long moment. "Takes a strong man to admit being wrong," he said finally. His voice was gentle but not soft. "I accept your apology. Won't forget it happened. Can't do that. But I choose peace. Always have." Later that night, in his home study, Judge Hargrove sat at his desk beneath the dim circle of a reading lamp. His retirement letter lay before him, the words carefully chosen, effective immediately, with deep regret for actions unbecoming the bench. Below that, he drafted another document, the establishment of the Bell Veterans Justice Scholarship, funded by his own savings, to help veterans access legal services. The sky was just beginning to lighten with pre-dawn grey when Imani Reed loaded her briefcase into her car. She paused for a moment, looking back at the courthouse dome silvered by the fading stars. Her father had taught her that one honest choice could change everything, not just for one person, but for all the lives that person touched. She smiled, tired but content, and headed for home.